Hello and welcome back to Firestorm Games and the second part of our look at tanks. Now in the first video we focused mainly on the contents of the box and the miniatures, for example. However, this time we're going to be going through how the game actually plays. I'm going to go through some of the core mechanics of the game and explain how they work. So first things first, let's take a look at some of the stat cards. Here we have a particular stat card for a tank, notably the Panther that is found in the starter set. The card itself is split into several sections, with the first section being the name of the tank itself. To the right of this we have a small circle which denotes the points cost of the tank, and further right we have a flag which denotes the country in which this tank belongs to. The top half of the card is mostly dominated by a picture of the tank on the card, and this is used for easily identifying which tank is which on the battlefield. Below this is a small box which contains any special rules that the tank may have. Across the centre of the card we have four coloured boxes which denote the stats of the tank. Starting on the left we have the initiative value. Now this determines the order in which the tanks move, deploy and also shoot. Next we have the attack value of the tank, and this is the amount of dice the tank will roll when attacking an opponent. The green value determines how many dice the tank can roll when it's being fired at as a base defense roll. And finally we have the hit points of the tank. Now this number determines how many hits the tank can take before it is destroyed. To the right of this we also have several boxes which can be marked off as the tank takes damage. The final box explains any special rules that the tank may have. And finally, dotted around the card are several crew slots which determine the amount of crew members this tank can take. So that was a stat card for tanks. So now that we have an idea of how the stats for the individual tanks work, let's take a look at movement. Movement in tanks is exceptionally easy. Everything is done using these movement arrows. Simply place your arrow against the tank at any point, be it straight ahead or slightly to the side, and just move your tank so it's flush against the tail, as you can see here, either in this position here or in this position like so. From here you can perform an additional movement, so for example let's just place this over here and we're just going to move the tank over like so. Now once you finish your movement you would place one of these tokens down. If you move twice like I have done with this Panther here, you would place the 2 token, otherwise you would place the 1 token. And this is used to determine how easily you can be hit and also how easily you can hit other tanks. There are some tanks which have the fast special rule, such as the British tanks, which can move up to 3 times, and this is donated by this particular marker here. So now we've looked at basic movement, so let's see how terrain affects movement. Terrain comes in 2 main categories in tanks: impassable and passable. This wood here is an example of passable terrain, and the tank can simply drive through it normally as it would do open ground. Impassable terrain, such as this building here, cannot be moved through. Instead, if the tank tries to move through it, it must immediately end its move where it reaches the building like so. So now that we've mastered movement, let's take a look at shooting. Once all movement has been completed and all tanks have either elected to stay still or to move, then the shooting phase begins. Unlike movement, shooting goes from the tank with the highest initiative first, right down to the tank with the lowest initiative. So in this example we have the Panther over here, which has an initiative value of 7 as denoted on the card here, and only moved once in the last phase. Facing off against the Panther we have the Sherman 76mm here, which has an initiative value of 6, which means this tank will go second. As you can see, this tank moved twice in the previous phase. So now that we've determined the order in which the tanks will fire, we have to work out line of sight. Tanks with turrets, such as both of these here, have a 360-degree line of sight. However, tanks which have a fixed weapon, such as a Stug or a Jagdpanther, can only fire ahead of their turret. Within tanks there is no maximum distance. So long as you can see your opponent, you can shoot at them. However, if you are within 1 movement arrow, you actually get some bonuses which I'll discuss later on. So now that we've determined that the tanks are in line of sight of each other, we can actually start firing. First of all, we need to look at the Panther card at the attack value. Now this is the number of dice we need for the Panther. So first of all, we just grab 5 dice for the Panther, like so. Next we need to determine how many dice a Sherman player needs to roll in order to defend. Looking at the card we can see that it has a defense value of 1, which gives us 1 dice as standard. However, as the Sherman moved twice in its last movement, we get to add 2 additional dice. And because the Panther has already moved once, we get to add an additional dice. Now this represents targets being harder to hit and harder to shoot when they've been moving. However, as the Panther is within 1 movement stick of the Sherman, we get to remove 1 of these defense dice. The next step is to roll both sets of these dice, and we're looking for 4, 5s and 6. First of all, the Panther rolls his dice, which results in 2 hits, indicated by these 2 5s here, and also a critical hit indicated by the 6. Next, the Sherman player rolls his dice, looking for a 4, 5 or 6. And as we can see, the Sherman only rolled 1 success. Now, as the result was a 5, this means that one of the hits gets to be negated, and which hit gets to be negated is chosen by the Panther player, so the Panther player chooses to remove one of the standard hits. This means that 2 hits are performed against the Sherman, 1 normal hit and 1 critical hit. So first of all, we're going to deal with the standard hit, and we're going to place 1 damage token onto the Sherman's card. Next, we're going to be dealing with the critical hit. Now, instead of placing another token onto the tank for the critical hit, we instead draw one of these cards here. Now, these cards have different effects, such as this one here, which just performs 2 damage. However, there are some other cards, if I just flick through, you'll be able to see that some cards actually perform various different actions, such as this tank cannot move or shoot. However, it performs no damage and is repairable. So, for example, we're just going to be placing this 2 damage card down here, which allows us to add an extra 2 damage to the Sherman. Now, there are other defense modifiers in addition to range and also speed. For example, if the target is within cover, then the defender gets to roll an additional dice. Alternatively, if the attacking tank, such as this Panther here, is at least partially behind the front of the hull of the Sherman here as it is, you get to remove 1 defense dice from the Sherman. As a result, outmaneuvering your opponents and staying in cover can be vital in keeping your tanks alive. So what happens if your tank has all of its damage points crossed off? Now, this Sherman here has received 6 hits, which as you can see here is equal to its damage points total on the card, which means that the tank will be removed from the game. Now, the miniature itself stays on the table and it just acts as a destroyed tank. And as a result, it will block line of sight of any tanks trying to shoot over it. However, if your tank hasn't had a chance to shoot this particular round, you are able to make one last attack before your tank is destroyed. So with the shooting phase completed, let's move on to the final phase, the command phase. The command phase consists of 4 key areas, the first of which being destroying any tanks which have had all of their damage points received. The next step is to check for victory. If your opponent has had all of their tanks destroyed, then you win the game. The next step is to repair any damage. Now, if your tank received a critical hit and received any cards such as this one here with the repairable logo, you can attempt to repair it by rolling a dice. If you roll a 4, 5 or 6, then you can remove the card and any effects detailed on it. However, any damage that you scored due to the card must remain on the tank. The final section of the command phase is to reset the field. Now, this involves removing any movement tokens that you may have against your tanks and also shuffling any discarded critical cards back into the critical deck. Once all 4 of those steps have been completed of the command phase, you can now move on to the next turn, starting with the movement phase again. And that concludes Firestorm Games' brief guide on how to play tanks. As you can see, the mechanics of the game are very straightforward, which makes it extremely easy to learn. Now, there are a few things about tanks that we didn't touch on in this particular video. This includes crew effects and also equipment effects, as well as list building and some of the special rules allocated to the tanks. However, after watching this video, you should have a really good idea as to how the base game itself plays. If you would like to pick up a copy of Tanks, do head on over to the Firestorm Games web store, where you can pick it up for £16.20, which is slightly cheaper than the £18 RRP. Additionally, if you enjoyed this video, do let us know in the comments below, and also subscribe to be kept up to date with all of our latest videos. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.